A dictator is a player who has 100% of the power. That means if they vote for a motion, it passes. If they do not vote for a motion, it does not pass. Now, how you determine if a particular player is a dictator or not is that you look at the weight of the players. And if there is a player whose weight is greater than or equal to the quota, then they are considered a dictator. Let's look at this example. Now there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 players in this weighted voting system, and the quota is 12. Now let's see if a dictator exists. Does a player have a weight that's equal to or greater than the quota? And I would say yes. Player 1 has 13. 13 is greater than 12, the quota. So that means that player 1 is a dictator. Okay. Now dummies. A dummy is a player who has no power. If we were going to put a percentage on that, that would be 0%. And whenever there's a dictator, all of the other players have no power and are considered dummies. So let's go back up here to this example. This is an example where we have a dictator. Player 1 is a dictator. They have 100% of the power. What that means is that the remaining players, player 2, player 3, player 4, player 5, since player 1 has 100% of the power, they have 0% of the power and would be considered dummies. So player 2, player 3, player 4, player 5 equal dummies. Okay, let's look at another type of term. We talked about dictators, dummies. Now, a player could have veto power. Now, a player that would have veto power is one who can single-handedly prevent the rest of the players from passing a motion. Now, how to find out if a player has veto power is that you cover up each player one at a time. If the total of the remaining players' votes are enough to pass the motion, then the player that is covered up does not have veto power. However, but if the total of the remaining players' votes are not enough to pass the motion, then the player that is covered up does have veto power. So let's look at this example. This example has a quota that is 19. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 players. So let's check and see if any of these players have veto power. So let's check player 1. I'm going to check player 1 for veto power. So in essence, what we're going to do is we're going to cover up player 1's 9 votes. And we're going to count up the remaining players. So that would be player 2, player 3, player 4, player 5. So I'm just going to write that down. Player 2 plus player 3 plus player 4 plus player 5. And then player 2 has 7 plus 5 plus 3. Oh, this is supposed to be player 5. Player 5. And player 5 has 1 vote. Yeah, player 2 has 7, player 3 has 5, player 4 has 3, player 5 has 1. And if we add all those up, we get a total of 16. Now, you need 19 votes to pass a motion. So what this means is that without player 1's 9 votes, the remaining 4 people cannot pass a motion. Therefore, player 1 has veto power, and I'm just going to say VP, VP for veto power. Okay, player 1 has veto power. Now I'm going to go ahead and check the next player, player 2. Check player 2. Okay, I'm going to cover up player 2's votes. So that means I'm going to be counting up player 1, player 3, player 4, player 5. So P1 plus P3 plus P4 plus P5. And that would be 9 plus 5 plus 3 plus 1. And though that is a total of 18. 18 is not enough to pass. You need 19 votes to pass. Therefore, player 2, if player 2 does not vote with these 4 players, they cannot pass a motion. Therefore, player 2 has veto power. Okay, now we're just going to keep continuing and check player 3. See if player 3 has veto power. So I'm going to cover up player 3, and I'm going to count up the remaining votes. So player 1 plus player 2 plus player 4 plus player 5. That that would be 9 plus 7 plus 3 plus 1 for a total of 20. Now, if these group 4 people do not have player 3, they actually have enough votes to pass a motion without player 3. So what that means that player 3 does not have veto power. Now, once you find one player that does not have veto power, that means that the remaining players, player 4 and player 5, will not have veto power as well. So now we could just say player 1 and player 2, they have veto power. Those are the only two players in this example that have veto power. But I just want to go ahead and check player 4 and player 5 so you see what I'm talking about. So at this point, we could be done and just say player 1 and player 2 have veto power once you find one person that does not have veto power. But let's go ahead so you can see why that is. Now, when we check player 4 to see if they have veto power, you're going to be adding up player 1, player 2's, player 3, and player 5's votes, and see how the numbers are getting bigger because you're releasing a big number and covering up a smaller number. So the totals will get bigger. So player 1 plus player 2 plus player 3, we're leaving out player 4. We're going to add player 5, so that's going to be 9 plus 7 plus 5 plus 1 for a total of 22. And see how the total is going up. When we check player 3, the total was only, when we check player 1, the total was 16. And then we check player 2, it was 18. And then player 3, it's 20. And player 4, now it's 22. It's getting bigger each time. So, 22 is enough for these people to pass. Therefore, they don't need player 4. So player 4 does not have veto power. And then lastly, if we were going to check player 5, we'd add up player 1 through player 4. So player 1 plus player 2 plus player 3 plus player 4. That would be 9 plus 7 plus 5 plus 3 for a total of 24. And see, the total goes up again. 24 votes is enough for these 4 people to pass a motion without player 5. So player 5 does not have veto power. So once you find, player 1 has veto power, player 2 has veto power, and then you find a player that does not have veto power, you can stop at that point because the remaining players are not going to have veto power as well. And you can just say that player 1 and player 2 have veto power. But if player 3 did have veto power and player 4 had veto power, you'd have to keep going doing this process until you find one player that does not have veto power.